September 18, 1873. The most powerful banker in America pins a notice to the door of his firm. Closed. Within hours, the New York Stock Exchange descends into chaos. Prices collapse faster than clerks can update the boards. Men panic. Orders cannot be filled. For the first time in its history, the New York Stock Exchange suspends trading entirely. The doors close. Silence falls over the floor. And then the shockwave begins. Vienna, Berlin, London, Paris, Buenos Aires. One after another, economies across 3 continents begin to collapse. In the United States, the crash that followed was called the Great Depression, until 1929 set a new standard. This is the story of the Panic of 1873, the first truly international financial crisis in history, the one nobody talks about, and the man who caused it was the same man who had saved the Union. To understand the Panic of 1873, you must first understand J. Cooke. Born in Ohio in 1821, Cooke had made his name in Philadelphia banking before the Civil War gave him his defining moment. In 1861, as the Union struggled to finance the most expensive war in American history, Treasury Secretary Salmon Chase approached Cooke with an extraordinary task. Sell the war. Cooke agreed. He devised something that had never been attempted before, a mass retail bond campaign. Rather than selling government bonds exclusively to wealthy institutions, Cooke dispatched an army of agents, 2,500 of them, across America, to farms, to factories, to small towns, selling small-denomination Union bonds directly to ordinary citizens. He placed advertisements in 5,000 newspapers. He hired ministers to endorse the bonds from pulpits. He made patriotic investment accessible to every American family. The campaign raised $1.6 billion for the Union war effort. It is not an exaggeration to say that J. Cooke's bond sales helped the Union outlast the Confederacy. Abraham Lincoln's government could not have financed the war without him. By the end of the Civil War, J. Cooke was the most famous banker in America. The press called him the financier of the Civil War. He was 44 years old, and he was about to make the worst decision of his life. The first transcontinental railroad had been completed in 1869. Entrepreneurs were already planning a second. The Northern Pacific Railroad, a line stretching from Duluth, Minnesota to Seattle, Washington, would traverse some of the most remote and hostile terrain in North America. Across the Dakota Territory, through the lands of the Sioux, over the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific coast. In 1869, J. Cooke, the brilliant but idiosyncratic American banker, decided to finance the Northern Pacific. He was inspired by the explorations of Lewis and Clark, by his belief that God had chosen him to spread civilization westward, and by the enormous profits he believed the railroad would eventually generate. But the railroad defied conventional wisdom. The region lacked population centers enabling immediate profits. To market the railroad, Cooke named its terminus city after the German chancellor, Bismarck, North Dakota, in hopes of encouraging German immigration to the area. He hired George Armstrong Custer to escort surveying parties through Sioux territory. That decision backfired badly. Negative publicity generated by Indian fights, the most damaging reports being authored by Custer, caused investors to stop purchasing Cooke's railroad bonds, and construction beyond Bismarck was halted. Cooke had committed his entire firm to financing the Northern Pacific. He had used his depositors' money to fund unsold railroad bonds. He had staked his reputation, and everyone else's savings, on a railroad through empty wilderness, and now the investors were gone. The spark that ignited the American crisis came from Europe. After German unification in 1871, Otto von Bismarck had extracted a massive gold indemnity from France. He then made a fateful decision. Germany would abandon the silver standard and move exclusively to gold. The effect rippled immediately. There was a huge speculative bubble taking place in the newly unified Germany, which had just won a war with France. That bubble extended to Austria, where the stock market crashed on May 9, 1873. The Vienna Stock Exchange, which had grown from holding 39 companies to 378 in just 6 years, collapsed in what became known as Black Friday in Vienna. The panic spread rapidly across Europe. Over the next 4 years, shares in German companies lost 60% of their value. European investors, who had been among the most reliable buyers of American railroad bonds, suddenly needed their capital at home. Cooke had hoped to sell Northern Pacific bonds, half of the $100 million underwritten, in Europe. However, financial crisis in Europe, which began in Austria in May 1873, weakened demand for American railway bonds. The money Cooke was counting on simply stopped coming. And the transatlantic telegraph cable, laid in 1866, meant that financial panic now moved between continents at the speed of electricity. The world's first truly global financial crisis was taking shape. By September 1873, J. Cooke and Company was in desperate trouble. The firm had been using its depositors' funds to finance unsold Northern Pacific bonds. Those bonds could not be sold. European buyers had vanished. American investors were spooked. Cooke's New York partners, concerned that Cooke had overcommitted to the railroad, took actions that shut down Cooke's banking houses and effectively put Cooke into personal bankruptcy. On September 18, 1873, J. Cooke and Company closed its doors. When the banking firm of J. Cooke and Company, a firm heavily invested in railroad construction, closed its doors on September 18, 1873, a major economic panic swept the nation. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The J. Cooke failure triggered a U.S. panic that brought down 98 banks, 89 railroad companies, and 18,000 other businesses. The New York Stock Exchange, for the first time in its history, suspended trading for 10 days. President Ulysses S. Grant rushed to New York to meet with bankers and assess the damage. The Treasury injected $10 million into the New York money market, the first government financial intervention of its kind in American history. It was not enough. What followed J. Cooke's failure was not a recession. It was a depression that lasted 6 years. By 1876, 1 in 7 Americans was out of work. The depression set off railroad strikes. Workers all over the country, in response to wage cuts and poor working conditions, struck and prevented trains from moving. President Rutherford B. Hayes was forced to send federal troops to more than half a dozen states to stop the strikes. In the end, the fighting between strikers and troops left more than 100 people dead and many more injured. 89 railroad companies failed. 18,000 businesses across America closed. Farmers watched their land auctioned off to creditors. Half-finished railroad tracks rusted in open fields across the Dakota Territory. Trade declined sharply, with nations imposing tariffs to protect domestic industries, leading to economic isolationism. Germany and Austria experienced severe economic contractions, leading to widespread social unrest. In the United Kingdom, industries like coal, iron, and steel faced stagnation, with unemployment remaining high for years. In Britain, the crash triggered 2 decades of stagnation, known as the Long Depression, permanently weakening British economic leadership in the world. In the United States, this depression was called the Great Depression, until 1929 made that name mean something worse. The Panic of 1873 was not caused by one man. J. Cooke lit the fuse, but the powder had been building for years. Like many panics that presaged depressions, there was not just one cause to the Panic of 1873, but rather a multitude of factors. First, the railroad boom. Investments in railroads, land, and speculative ventures were largely fueled by debt, creating a bubble that was bound to burst. Second, the currency crisis. During the Civil War, the U.S. government had printed enormous quantities of paper money, greenbacks, to finance the war. Currency in the 19th century was based on specie. Metal money circulated and banks issued paper banknotes backed by the supply of gold and silver. In the United States, This system began breaking down in the face of financing the Civil War. Third, the Coinage Act of 1873. The Coinage Act of 1873 was a pivotal moment in the lead-up to the Panic of 1873. It was passed by the U.S. Congress in response to the decline in silver prices, which was caused by the German Empire's decision to stop minting silver thaler coins in 1871. The act effectively moved the United States to a de facto gold standard, contracting the money supply at precisely the wrong moment. Critics called it the crime of 1873. Farmers and debtors who needed cheap money suddenly found it in desperately short supply. And fourth, the Credit Mobilier scandal of 1872, in which the Union Pacific Railroad had been caught inflating construction costs to steal government subsidies, had already destroyed investor confidence in railroad bonds. The system was primed to fail. J. Cooke simply provided the trigger. J. Cooke lost everything on September 18, 1873. His mansion, his art collection, his firm. But the story did not end there. J. Cooke, the man who had caused the first Great Depression in American history, rebuilt his fortune. Within 15 years, he had recovered through silver mining investments in Utah and died a wealthy man in 1905. History, as always, was kinder to the man than to the millions who suffered the consequences of his gamble. And the depression that followed the Panic of 1873 reshaped the American economy in ways that echo to this day. The Panic of 1873 highlighted the dangers of overspeculation and reliance on debt. In the years that followed, there was a greater emphasis on financial regulation and the need for more stable economic policies. But the most significant consequence was consolidation. The Depression wiped out thousands of small businesses, farms, and railroad companies. And the men with enough capital to survive, John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, J.P. Morgan, used the ruins to build empires. The Gilded Age was born in the wreckage of 1873. The robber barons did not build their fortunes despite the Depression. They built them because of it. The Northern Pacific Railroad was eventually completed in 1883, 10 years late, at enormous human and financial cost, across the graves of thousands of dreams. The New York Stock Exchange reopened after 10 days and has never closed again for as long. And America, having survived its first Great Depression without a central bank, spent the next 40 years lurching from crisis to crisis. The Panic of 1884, the Panic of 1893, the Panic of 1896, the Panic of 1907, until finally, in 1910, 6 men boarded a private railway car in New Jersey under cover of darkness and went to Jekyll Island to build the thing that was supposed to stop all of this from ever happening again. You already know how that story ends. The vault gets richer, and somewhere, always somewhere, something else is burning. Next video, the men who built their fortunes on the ruins of 1873, Rockefeller, Carnegie, Morgan, Vanderbilt, the robber barons, and the Gilded Age they built on the bones of the Long Depression. Subscribe to Vault and Ruin. We go where the money went.